An old family picture, dating back to 1890, held a terrifying secret that only became clear when magnified. Rebecca Martinez, a seasoned antique dealer with over 2 decades of experience attending estate sales, felt an inexplicable unease about the Victorian mansion in Salem, Massachusetts. The Whitmore estate had been locked up for years, ever since the last family member passed away, without any heirs. As Rebecca explored the dusty rooms filled with antique furniture and artifacts, she found herself strangely drawn to an elaborate wooden frame hanging in the dimly lit hallway. The photograph inside was a typical family portrait from the late 19th century. A serious-looking family of 5 was posed stiffly in their best Sunday attire. The father, a distinguished man with a thick mustache, stood behind his seated wife, while their 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, were arranged around them. The year 1890 was inscribed at the bottom of the frame in faded ink. It wasn't the family itself that captured Rebecca's attention, but rather the exceptional quality of the photograph. Most images from that era were grainy and unclear, but this one displayed remarkable detail in the clothing, furniture, and even the wallpaper behind the family. She noticed that the children's expressions seemed unusually tense for a formal portrait, their eyes wide with what appeared to be barely concealed fear. Intrigued by its unusual clarity and the story it might tell, Rebecca purchased the photograph along with several other items. Little did she know that this seemingly innocent family portrait would soon reveal a secret that had been hidden for over 130 years. Back in her Boston antique shop, Rebecca decided to clean and restore the photograph before putting it up for sale. As she carefully removed it from its frame, she noticed that the image was printed on unusually thick photographic paper for that period. Using a high-powered magnifying glass to assess its condition, she began examining the details more closely. The first thing that struck her as odd was the positioning of the family members. While formal Victorian portraits typically showed subjects sitting perfectly still due to long exposure times, this family seemed to be captured in a moment of subtle movement. The mother's hand was slightly blurred, as if she had been trembling, and the youngest child's eyes were looking off to the side rather than at the camera. But it was when Rebecca focused on the background that she noticed something truly disturbing. In the ornate mirror hanging on the wall behind the family, she could see a reflection that didn't match what was in the room. Instead of showing the photographer or the camera equipment, the mirror revealed what appeared to be several shadowy figures standing behind where the photographer should have been. Rebecca adjusted her magnifying glass and looked closer. The figures in the mirror were dressed in dark clothing and appeared to be holding what looked like restraints or ropes. Her hands began to shake as she realized this might not be a willing family portrait at all. She immediately called her friend Dr. James Harrison, a historian specializing in 19th century photography at Harvard University. Dr. Harrison arrived at Rebecca's shop the next morning, skeptical but curious about her claims. As he examined the photograph under professional-grade equipment, his expression grew increasingly serious. "This photograph is definitely from 1890, he confirmed, but the circumstances surrounding it are highly unusual. The quality suggests it was taken by a professional photographer with access to the best equipment of the era." His examination revealed additional disturbing details. The children's clothing, while expensive, showed signs of being hastily put on. Buttons were misaligned, and the youngest girl's dress was wrinkled as if she had been dressed by someone else. More troubling were the barely visible marks on the father's wrists, which appeared to be rope burns or restraint marks. Dr. Harrison began researching the Whitmore family history. Records showed that Edmund Whitmore was a wealthy textile manufacturer who had built his fortune during the Industrial Revolution. His wife, Catherine, came from an established Boston family. They had 3 children, Margaret, 14, William, 12, and little Emma, 8. The family had lived in the Salem mansion since 1885. What Dr. Harrison discovered next sent chills down his spine. According to newspaper records from October 1890, the entire Whitmore family had vanished without a trace. Their disappearance had been front-page news in Boston papers for weeks. The house had been found unlocked with no signs of struggle, as if the family had simply walked away from their lives. No bodies were ever found. No ransom notes were received, and no witnesses came forward. The case had remained one of Massachusetts' most enduring mysteries. Armed with this new information, Dr. Harrison contacted Detective Sarah Chin, a cold case specialist with the Massachusetts State Police who had worked on several historical crime investigations. When Sarah saw the photograph and heard the story, she immediately agreed to open an unofficial investigation into the Whitmore disappearance. Sarah's first step was to have the photograph analyzed by forensic experts using modern digital enhancement technology. The results were more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. Computer analysis revealed that the figures in the mirror weren't photographic artifacts or reflections of furniture. They were definitely human forms, and they appeared to be restraining or threatening someone just outside the camera's view. Even more chilling was the discovery of what appeared to be a message hidden in the photograph. Using advanced imaging techniques, investigators found faint scratches in the wooden frame of the mirror that spelled out, "Help us," when viewed under the right lighting conditions. The scratches appeared to have been made deliberately, as if someone had tried to leave a coded message. The forensic team also discovered that the photograph showed evidence of having been taken quickly, possibly under duress. Unlike typical Victorian portraits that required subjects to remain motionless for several seconds, this image captured micro-expressions and involuntary movements that suggested the family was under extreme stress. During the photo session, Sarah began to theorize that this wasn't a family portrait at all, but rather documentation of a crime in progress, possibly taken by the perpetrators themselves as some form of trophy or proof. Sarah's investigation led her to examine court records and business documents from the 1890s. What she discovered painted a disturbing picture of Edmund Whitmore's final months. His textile business had been failing due to labor disputes and financial mismanagement. More significantly, Whitmore had borrowed heavily from a group of investors with questionable backgrounds and possible connections to organized crime. In the months before the family's disappearance, Whitmore had received several threatening letters demanding repayment of his debts. The letters, preserved in court files related to the estate, contained increasingly violent threats against his family if the money wasn't returned. One letter explicitly mentioned making an example of the Whitmores that would serve as a warning to other debtors. Sarah also discovered that a professional photographer named Marcus Crane had been hired to document foreclosure proceedings at various properties around Massachusetts during this period. Crane's work was often used by debt collectors to inventory valuable assets before seizure. More disturbing was the discovery that Crane had disappeared from Boston in late 1890, around the same time as the Whitmore family. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a horrifying picture. The photograph appeared to be documentation of the family being held captive, possibly taken to prove to other debtors that the threats were real. The exceptional quality and professional nature of the photograph supported the theory that it was taken by Marcus Crane under duress, possibly as part of his cooperation with the criminal organization. Sarah's research into Marcus Crane revealed a tragic story of a man caught between his artistic integrity and criminal coercion. Crane had been one of Boston's most respected photographers, known for his technical innovation and artistic vision. However, financial difficulties had forced him to take increasingly questionable assignments to support his family. Court documents revealed that Crane had been arrested several times in 1889 for debt-related offenses and had been known to associate with criminal elements who used his photography skills for intimidation and documentation purposes. Letters found in the Massachusetts Historical Society's archives, written by Crane's wife to her sister, described her husband's growing fear and desperation as he became more deeply involved with dangerous people. The final letter from Mrs. Crane, dated just days before her husband's disappearance, was particularly revealing. Marcus came home last night shaking and pale. He said they've asked him to do something terrible, something that goes against everything he believes in. He's terrified, but he says he has no choice. I fear for our family if he refuses, but I fear for his soul if he complies. This correspondence suggested that Crane had been forced to photograph the Whitmore family during their captivity, possibly as evidence of the creditor's power and willingness to harm defaulting families. The exceptional quality of the photograph took on a sinister meaning. It was meant to be preserved as a warning to others, which explained why it had survived for so long and why it showed such disturbing detail when examined closely. As Sarah delved deeper into the investigation, she uncovered evidence of what appeared to be the Whitmore family's final hours. Property records showed that the Salem mansion had been visited by several unknown individuals in the days leading up to the family's disappearance. Neighbors had reported seeing carriages arriving at odd hours and hearing sounds of distress from the house. A breakthrough came when Sarah discovered a hidden compartment in the mansion's basement during a search with modern equipment. Inside, she found personal belongings that had belonged to the Whitmore children: toys, clothing, and most significantly, a small diary belonging to 14-year-old Margaret Whitmore. The final entries in the diary were written in a shaky, frightened hand. Margaret's diary entries from October 1890 told a horrifying story. Strange men had been visiting the house, threatening her father and demanding money he didn't have. The family had been living in fear for weeks, with the children forbidden to leave the house or speak to neighbors. Margaret wrote about her father's increasing desperation and her mother's constant tears. The final entry, dated the day the photograph was taken, was barely legible. "They came back today with a cameraman. Papa is crying. They made us dress up nice and said we have to smile for picture. Mama says to be brave. I can hear them talking about what happens next. I'm scared we won't see another sunrise. If anyone finds this, please remember us as we were, not as they want us to look." This diary entry confirmed Sarah's worst fears about the photograph. It had been taken as documentation of the family's final moments before they were murdered as an example to other debtors. Sarah's investigation expanded to uncover what appeared to be an organized network of debt collection that operated through intimidation, violence, and murder. The Whitmore case was not isolated. Records showed that several other wealthy families who had defaulted on loans to the same creditors had also disappeared under mysterious circumstances during the 1880s and 1890s. Working with historians and genealogists, Sarah identified at least 6 other families who had vanished after borrowing money from the same network of investors. In each case, the disappearances followed a similar pattern: increasing threats, isolation of the family, and then complete disappearance without a trace. Most disturbing was the discovery that some of these families' former homes had also contained hidden photographs and personal belongings, suggesting a systematic approach to eliminating witnesses. The criminal organization appeared to be led by a group of wealthy businessmen who used legitimate businesses as fronts for loan sharking and extortion. They employed photographers, lawyers, and other professionals to document their activities and provide a veneer of legitimacy to their operations. When debtors couldn't pay, the entire family was eliminated to send a message to others. Sarah realized that the Whitmore photograph was evidence of one of the most sophisticated and brutal criminal enterprises in 19th-century New England. The organization had operated for decades using fear and violence to control a network of debtors, with the Whitmore family becoming one of their most tragic victims. The exceptional quality of the photograph now made complete sense. It was meant to be preserved as a permanent record of the organization's power and ruthlessness. Even though the crimes had occurred over 130 years ago, Sarah felt compelled to give the Whitmore family the dignity of having their story told and their fate acknowledged. Working with the district attorney's office, she prepared a comprehensive report documenting the evidence of the family's murder and the criminal organization responsible. The investigation revealed that members of the criminal network had continued operating well into the 20th century, with some of their descendants becoming prominent members of Boston society. While no criminal charges could be filed due to the passage of time, the exposure of their ancestors' crimes created significant scandal and led to several families quietly making substantial donations to victims' rights organizations. Sarah also worked with the Massachusetts Historical Society to ensure that the Whitmore family's story was properly documented and preserved. Margaret's diary was donated to the Society's archives, along with a photograph and all evidence uncovered during the investigation. A memorial service was held for the Whitmore family, attended by distant relatives who had never known the true circumstances of their ancestors' disappearance. The photograph that had started as a curiosity in an antique shop had become crucial evidence in solving one of Massachusetts' oldest cold cases. Rebecca Martinez donated the photograph to the Historical Society, stating that she could never have lived with herself knowing the family's story and, keeping it for profit. Dr. Harrison published a comprehensive academic paper about the case, which became required reading in criminology and history courses focused on organized crime in America. The Whitmore case became a landmark example of how modern technology could solve historical crimes and bring closure to families who had suffered for generations without knowing their loved one's fate. The photograph, once a source of curiosity and then horror, became a powerful symbol of the importance of preserving evidence and never giving up on seeking justice. Sarah's investigation had broader implications for historical crime research. The techniques used to analyze the Whitmore photograph were applied to other mysterious disappearances from the era, leading to the solution of several additional cold cases. The Massachusetts State Police established a dedicated cold case unit focused on historical crimes, with Sarah as its director. Rebecca Martinez used her experience with the Whitmore photograph to become an advocate for ethical practices in the antique trade, establishing protocols for handling potentially significant historical artifacts. She worked with law enforcement and historians to ensure that items with possible criminal connections were properly investigated rather than simply sold as curiosities. The story of the Whitmore family photograph served as a reminder that behind every historical artifact lies a human story. And sometimes, those stories demand justice, even across the centuries. The terrifying detail revealed when the 1890 photograph was zoomed in, the evidence of a family's final moments, had finally allowed their voices to be heard and their tragedy to be acknowledged. Margaret Whitmore's final diary entry had asked that the family be remembered as we were, not as they want us to look. Thanks to the courage of those who refused to let their story remain hidden, the Whitmore family was finally remembered not as victims frozen in a moment of terror, but as a loving family whose lives were cut short by greed and violence, and whose memory deserved to be honored and preserved for future generations.